Hello, Martin. You are the Scientific Director of AI and Data at the University of Copenhagen and also a founding chair of the Open and Agile Smart Cities, or OASC in short. You've spent quite some years already shaping how cities and communities use technology to become smarter and more connected. And you've also led groundbreaking projects on interoperability, data spaces and smart cities across the whole of Europe. So I'm happy that you are here today.
Thank you.
To start, Martin, could you share a bit up until now what your journey has been and what has inspired you specifically to focus on interoperability, which is quite a niche subject, and digital transformation for cities and communities?
Yes, first of all, it's essential, it's important. Second, it is very complicated, so it's not a trivial issue. So I think that inspires me. That's an interesting challenge, but also one that is meaningful and can actually make life better for many people.
You already briefly touched on it, that it can be complicated. I would say like interoperability can be called like the backbone of digital transformation. Why is it so critical to have it? And then maybe the connection for cities specifically. Why do they need it to have a smarter and more connected community?
Many people have talked about data as being the new oil. I think it's much more relevant to think about it as water. So think about a community, you need water, right? But you don't need too much water, and you don't need too little water, and you don't need the wastewater together with the drinking water and the surface water. It's very similar. Finding just the Goldilocks balance of interoperability where you can share, but not overshare and not undershare data. That's pretty complex. Also because it involves so many different roles. And unless you are Napoleon, you cannot just go out and say to 80,000 local governments in Europe, or 500,000 in the world, do this exactly in the same way. You cannot do that. So it's a very complex task, but it's one we cannot shy away from now that data is really essential for our lives.
Could you give me an example of that oversharing or undersharing that was happening or is happening in cities today?
I think it's quite clear that we don't want our private information, our health information, maybe some critical infrastructure information to just float freely so that we can see harm because of that. I would call that oversharing. But also we don't want that our doctor doesn't have access to what the previous doctor found out with our blood tests or whatever. If we don't have that, I would call that undersharing. But just the right amount of sharing is actually what we want. Another example, which is very banal, has to do with surveillance. I mean, many people would say, I don't want surveillance, except when you fall over in the street, you want to be surveilled and found. So whether that's by people nearby or it's by your watch or whatever, we can discuss. Mm-hmm. But certainly it's dependent on your situation, what is over and undersharing. And that's one of the fundamental issues.
Okay. Touching on the data spaces and the AI work that you have also done, like the data spaces for sustainable cities and communities, and the Sitcom AI project. Could you give me an example there of where the data spaces and the interoperability have transformed a European city or community, like a tangible outcome of those projects?
Yes. So very often data is captured with one purpose: health, mobility, building, or mapping, or taxation. And there's very good reason, very often, for not using it for different purposes. But sometimes, maybe in planning of the morning traffic or in planning of new areas in town, it would be helpful if we could use the data that we have as a community and put that together and see how could we do things better. So to do that, in a way which doesn't infringe on our privacy, but helps the community. That's something that has helped not just one, but many cities and local governments. So being able to use data on a community basis. So the city of Aarhus has optimized its traffic, the city of Ghent, the many areas around Europe, and I would say in the world. And the thing is, if something works in Porto to connect the sensors that are around in the city and that citizens trust it in Porto, then it's much more likely that it will work in another city, in Athens, or in another place in the world. So this what you ask for is these examples, and actually it's the proof that it works locally in one place that is creating the trust in the management around this. And I think this is something we should maybe come back to, that interoperability is the trust that we don't share too much or too little, but we help in everyday lives and with some of the bigger policy goals that are not necessarily just local.
Yeah, I find it interesting that you say that what would work in Porto would work somewhere else. So in that sense, because I see cities as like for a lot of countries, it's the most granular level you can get in the organization of a state, a lot of the times. But what you would say is like, even though their needs might be very specific for their context, what you found out with the data spaces initiatives is also that the solutions you find are also quite transposable.
Yes and no. I think one aspect that we must realize is that a city government or a municipality can actually be very different from sector to sector. So the technical department can work in very different ways than the social department or the educational department, just to take an example. So first of all, we must understand that it's also within the organizations and within the community, so all the actors, the school children and parents, the patients, the people in the street, the contractors, that things need to work. So this idea that a city is just like one organization, that doesn't fly. So yes, actually what are the transposable solutions is how to do things differently. Because then that will work in a different setting where they do things slightly differently. And by the way, when the policy changes, because there are politicians in local governments, it still works, even though you might have slightly changing priorities. So the key is the difference, based on some very, very minimal similarities.
Yeah, if you like consider that as the as-is, right? If you then want to move to a more interoperable organizational structure, what is like the challenges you see when you try to go to like a to-be situation where that tax unit within the city and the health unit and the mobility unit can exchange and organize themselves in a more interoperable way?
That's a very good question. I would say in one word, experience. Both experience within the organization, so the different parts they learn together, both about what works and what doesn't work, and then sharing experiences with peers, with neighboring organizations or communities, but also across borders. So building this experience actually is the precursor for reaping the benefits of a more mature digital environment.
Yeah, and then you can do it once, right? And then say 5-10 years, people change departments, people go, people join. How can you solidify that way of working long term? Like, what are some things you can do to make sure that that stays the way that you can operate? Yeah.
Well, again, there's a couple of essential things. There's the working culture, so that you also share your learnings in your work environment. But there's also working with institutions for lifelong learning. I mean, both for students that come out fresh from university or school, but also how do you then learn together? So whether it's in living labs or it's in more formal further education, you can really do a lot. And I think the network, so this learning together, can also build a more long-lasting learning curve or resilience, because, I mean, things go up and down in different places, right? We know that over time, it's 5 or 10 or 15 years, economy goes up and down and so on. But the good thing is, if you are a network of similar organizations, whether it's national or it's local, you can still have the others learning while you may be struggling to fund your, I don't know, innovation strategy or your sustainability strategy or your digital transformation strategy. So the learning continues, and you can hook back in when you have the surplus to engage. So this networking effect is very, very powerful, and we've seen that over the last 3 decades.
So, talking about that connection and that learning, how can we make sure that the needs of cities are covered sufficiently on a European level as well?
That's a very good and quite challenging question. First of all, the local governments, the cities, are not recognized in the original treaties. We have the Committee of the Regions. Now it's regions and cities increasingly, but actually the local level is not originally a structural part. That's an issue, and we see it. I can give you a very concrete example. In the European semester, which is this mechanism every half year, the European budgets are aligned with the member states or national budgets. So for instance, if on the European level the member states agree to set aside some money for digital transformation, interoperability, and they just anticipate at some point the local governments will engage. They will have miraculously put budget aside to engage for co-financing or whatever. That never happens, because cities, they make their budgets 1 or 2 years in advance or even further. So there's a third wheel missing in the European semester, which actually, for those who want to do this network-based transformation, have a huge issue, because they cannot pre-budget for these fantastic ideas to work together. So it's a very concrete example where I think we can improve by inviting the local governments into the budgeting. Nothing is perfect, so of course there has to be room for political negotiations also locally, but at least there is an attention that if we want the impact of this third of the GDP, which is unfolded locally, we also need to plan for it in the European semester.
So what I remember is that either cities can be too early or too late, depending on where the decisions in the semester are being taken. That's,
Yes, I mean, it's like cogwheels. They have to be well-timed, because if you put aside funds and there's no, let's say, co-financing on the European level or national level, you cannot really get the network effect. And if you're too late, well, then you don't have the budget when it's needed. And you can engage in, you have difficulty engaging in piloting or validation or learning together.
Yeah. Looking ahead then, you are, with your role at University of Copenhagen, together with the OASC role, how do you see it in the future evolving that AI and data can further support cities more so than what is happening now?
Well, I think it's a given. It has to. The data is there. It is being collected in our pockets, in our streets, in our homes, and in our workplaces. So data is there like water comes from the sky. The question is how we manage it. And I think the big drivers have been the crisis. First, the health crisis with Corona, and then the war on the European continent. So this need simply to be more effective, to be more resilient, to be able to follow urgent political priorities, that puts a pressure on us to work well with data. And we can see in those territories where there is pressure, whether for climate reasons or for political reasons, that progression is happening very fast. So I think we will see actually some very fast consolidation in this a little bit slow interoperability landscape, where the focus really will be on resilience, whether it's in the energy system linked to the political priorities, or it's in the trickling down effects on mobility infrastructure and all other kinds of infrastructure. That, I think, will happen very quickly. And with the digital omnibus out now, I think that Europe has really positioned itself very well for, an updated interoperability framework.
Yeah. They say that crisis creates opportunity, right? That's a bit, we should grasp it, is what I hear.
Well, we can't really avoid the crisis, so let's make the best of them.
Yeah. Given that situation, to conclude, what would be one of the pieces of advice, or maybe you frequently give pieces of advice to policymakers on a European level, coming from the city level?
I think one of the most low-hanging fruits that we can pick is to learn from those quite large-scale pilots that we already have seen. But we are often so eager to go to the next big thing that we forget to actually assess what came in. And there is a wealth of learning from the previous interoperability frameworks, the previous standardization efforts, and those pre-commercial and commercial procurement processes that really can be put together as a very solid baseline for the next iteration. I think that's cheap, it's efficient, and it's good logic. If we can put that into some good learning packages also for policymakers, I think that would really be low-hanging fruit.
I think that's a very nice way of putting it and concluding it. So thank you very much, Martin, to take the time to sit with us and have a chat. And yeah, thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.